Good afternoon and welcome to the January 22nd, 2013 meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. Can we have roll call, please?
Authority members: Friedman.
Here.
Manukian.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Parazian.
Here.
Quintero.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Chair Najarian.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the January 2nd, 2013 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, January 17, 2013 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. The next item?
Approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
With no objections or corrections, the minutes will be approved as submitted. Next item, please.
Next item is oral communication. Discussion is limited time, is not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Housing Authority may question or respond to a speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. And the Executive Director may refer the matter to the appropriate department for investigation or report. There is only one card submitted.
Richard Espiritu.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Housing Authority, and staff. I am Richard Espiritu. I want to relate a little story to you that happened to me just recently. I was at Ralph's Market, and this elderly lady who has arthritis came up to me along with her son and said, "We have been trying for 2 years to get handicap parking in front of the house that I own." With that comment, I went over to the transportation department, spoke to a young man who was at the desk that day, and I said, "I'd like to have the policies, procedures, and practices that the city of Glendale has for a person who lives in a residential area to obtain handicap parking." He came back with a piece of paper, this paper, and you all have a copy of it, from accessible parking for the streets set up by the state of California, which gives you a description of how to set up the parking. I asked him for the policies and procedures, and he says, "I don't have any." He went back, looked, came back, and says, "I don't have any." And I says, "Will you please write that down on the back of this paper?" And he put up his hands. "I don't do anything, but you can talk to my supervisor." Supervisor came out and says, "We don't have any policies and procedures." Well, that raises some interesting questions, because that's reasonable accessibility. I'm going to be submitting to you a letter from the Attorney General dated May 15th, 2001, that says all municipalities within the state of California have to create reasonable accessibility policies, even if they have to change them. I'm also going to submit to you today from the Department of Justice regarding the Fair Housing Act a statement that says the refusal to make reasonable accommodation in the rules, policies, and practices for services for accommodation may be afford much person equal opportunity to enjoy their property. Reasonable accommodation, 2 years is not reasonable to ask the city of Glendale for handicap parking in front of their residency. I'm also going to submit to you a case file. It's Silvia Tovato versus the City of Manchester, New Hampshire. It went to court. This lady, who had muscular sclerosis, asked the city for handicap parking on her front lawn, which is basically in front of her place, and the city refused because they said it was against their zoning ordinance. It went to court, and guess what? The court said she has every right to reasonable accommodation, and until she sells that house that she was living in, she could have her handicap parking. That was the decision of the court. So with that said, I would like, and this is the second time that I've had to deal with the city of Glendale regarding reasonable accommodation. Getting tired of coming to the city of Glendale and fighting with people saying, this is reasonable accommodation. If somebody doesn't do something about reasonable accommodation for our disabled community, I think it's about time I file a claim against the city of Glendale with the Department of Justice regarding the Fair Housing Act. Reasonable accommodation is reasonable accommodation. You don't have to wait 2 years to get handicap parking. You do not need to wait 2 years to have accommodation for a family who are 94 years of age for reasonable accommodation and modification in their homes. Tell me why the city procrastinates for this period of time under the Fair Housing Act. That's a federal law. With that said, I'd like to thank you, and I will be giving to everybody, including the city manager, a copy of this.
I'm going to request that we hold a closed session item under threat of litigation so we can discuss this item. Is that inappropriate?
Probably at this stage, Mr. Chair, just given that it's a comment related if we don't do something, and I think we'd have to get into specifics a little bit more before we can say we're going to have a closed session. In addition, he's indicated he would file a claim with DOJ, not file a lawsuit. So
I see. Well, for the speaker, I know this is a subject that has come before the council before and has come before the TPC when I was a member. The first accommodation that I believe staff offered was to park in their own driveway, and that being the best and the closest and the most reliable location to park. Because once you put a handicapped spot in front of the house, there are other handicapped, if it's a crowded neighborhood, there are other handicapped individuals who will park in that spot. And in the case that I remember, that individual came back and said, oh, well, that's my handicapped space. You can't let anyone else park there. And it became very unmanageable at that point. So I don't know who we need to refer this to, maybe to Mr. Zern for a review of the policies. There are policies in place. Right. But that's the difficulty when you think that something will solve a problem. It often creates more animosity. You know, I'm the handicapped person, not you or the other guy.
I think it's a good idea for us to talk about it in however method you want.
So if staff isn't too tired of looking up these policies and procedures, if you could, when they are dug up and presented to council, make sure Mr. Espiritu has a copy to review as well. Are there any other cards? None. Let's move on to authority member and staff comments. Are there any comments? Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We're adjourned.